Georgia Tech's victory over Virginia on Wednesday means they get to face Duke on Thursday. Here's the potential number one seed in the NCAA tournament just sitting there waiting for you for the Yellow Jackets. It's no shock, Riley, that Duke is the heavy favorite in this game. Duke is the heavy favorite to win this tournament. They're one of the favorites to win the national championship. What can Georgia Tech do to potentially throw a wrench in that and give Duke at least a game?
They gotta show up and control the glass like they did against Virginia, and they have to get buckets in the paint pretty much. They outscored Virginia 40 to 26 in points in the paint. That's not going to happen against Duke, obviously, but I like that they at least had this performance where it showed they got it inside at will. Duncan Powell to me is another. We've been talking about him throughout the different previews and recaps and everything. He is the X factor in this one. You kind of know what you're going to get out of Nathan George and Dongo inside night in, night out. But even looking back at like honestly, I kind of was hoping that when these two teams played back when was it? It was late
January
December.
or December,
Duke,
yeah.
yeah, Duke slaughtered Georgia Tech in McCamish Pavilion. I was hoping that I could be like, oh, Duncan Powell, he's a different player than he was that night. Duncan Powell played 24 minutes that night, scored 13 points. Kind of what he's been doing since then too. However, I do feel like he's a little more efficient than he was then. He's more solidified in his role. Georgia Tech isn't trying to throw Ryan Matumbo out there like they were that game. They've narrowed down the rotation, which I think helps.
Mhm.
And at least they have a lot of bodies they can throw at like Malawash and Malik Brown, and maybe like I would assume it's going to be Powell on flag with the initial assignment. Advantage Powell. They can also throw Ibrahim Suare on him. They can throw Darion Sutton in him in phases as well. Again, like kind of grasping here because I think flag handles all of them, but it's at least
Yeah.
nice to have different options with like size. You're
Yeah.
not gonna be like Carolina where it's like okay if it's not Drake Powell or Jalen Withers on, I'm like good luck Seth Trimble, stop this guy.
Yeah, you're not going to be completely overpowered physically. Right, may be
Right.
outskilled. That is interesting too because it's going to make Malawach, Malik Brown, the other front court guys for Duke play at least close to their best or at least well. That hasn't always been the case, or teams haven't always made Duke do that. It does feel like Duke, there are worse things you can be than over relying on a Cooper flag. But it does seem as Cooper's gotten more and more into it and more dominant, the others for Duke are more and more willing to let him. Which,
Mhm.
yeah, generational talent, sure, here you go. But it then you run into the issue they ran into with Clemson, where okay, like Cooper's in foul trouble or got an off game or something's going on. You need the other guys to step up. This will be, I think, a good test for those other guys to make sure that they're on their game and that they're not just rolling the ball out thinking that they'll win.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It is like a good challenge for Duke, and like it's not. I don't think it's something they can sleepwalk through just because. I mean, we said in the preview for the Georgia Tech Virginia game. Now Georgia Tech has moved up to 8-3 over their last 11. Have some good wins thrown in there with the Louisville and Clemson wins. You can't just say they beat up on a bunch of nobodies in the ACC. Still, there's those puzzling losses like scoring 43 points on Wake Forest that definitely would give me pause if I was a Tech fan with like being straight up optimistic.
Mhm.
But I mean, I still see a world where Duke pulls away with like at the under 12 in the second half and wins by 20. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Tech giving them a good game for at least a half to hang in there a little longer
Yeah.
than expected and test to see what Duke is doing.
Well,
Because
that was how the first game went, right? It was a 5 point game at halftime, and then Duke blew it open at 20 plus the first like 5, 10 minutes in the second half. I could see this following a similar path, same as you. Ken Pom thinks so as well. He's got Duke winning this 83 to 61, a 22-point advantage for Duke. Is that the way that the final score kind of ends up in this one, or do you think that the Yellow Jacks can keep it closer?
we've been seeing like slower paced games so far in the ACC tournament. No team has scored 80 in regulation to where, I mean, obviously Duke is a different animal. That's not meant to be a slight at them. I just wonder if like the neutral site setting, kind of the conference tournament jitters, if that plays a factor here, that would keep Duke from completely running away with it and pushing the score to 80 to 90 plus. And Georgia Tech, I think, can like I wouldn't say they're an especially sound defensive team. They got lost like even against Isaac McNeely, they lost track of him a lot that game.
Mhm.
They kind of have the ability to muck it up a little bit, and I think when you're a team of that caliber, like it's kind of what you have to do to stay in games. They can make it interesting with like again Ndongo's rim protection and everything to ugly the game up a little bit. But It still ultimately feels like a game that Duke wins by like 17.
Do you know why I think at least no one's hit 80 yet?
Why is that?
The offenses have not been good that have played.
So you think it's
I
more of a reflection of the bottom of the ACC? They're
yeah.
like, oh, this is just a tough environment to play in.
Yeah,
They might be
I
on
think
something there
that
now.
combined with the sleepy environment, neither of which will be the case when Duke's on the court because Duke's got
Hmm.
the nation's second best offense. They're going to pack that arena out, which the morning session is going to have Duke and UNC. So, like, you're going to have Duke fans filling up half the arena or 45%. You'll probably have UNC fans filling up 50, rooting for Georgia Tech, and we'll split the other five between um, Georgia Tech and Wake Forest fans, right?
Yeah,
Wake
Wake
Forest
Forest
is the
as
four
well.
seed. We'll split the other 5% that way. Could be a fun game. Could be a fun atmosphere. We'll be back with a full recap after the game. So make sure you like and subscribe.